We are reconvened into the committee room to discuss adoption of the fiscal year 2018 budget in lieu of passage of an appropriation ordinance. We're not taking any action tonight. This is, I've been told, one of 10
That's correct, Mayor.
potential budget meetings that we'll be having before its adoption. And tonight's the first of that series. So I will turn it over to Village Manager Dave Fieldman to introduce this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is the first of many meetings regarding the FY18 proposed budget. This budget, like many others before it, is the implementation of council direction previously provided in things like long-range plans and comprehensive plans and a myriad of other plans. So what that means is, if you've been following along over the last year or so, that there are no real surprises in this proposed budget. The budget process is participative and transparent. As the mayor just mentioned, 10 public meetings. The budget as proposed at this point is posted on our village website and has been posted since mid to late September. It's also a deliberative process. It takes about 3 months to go from publication to adoption. The budget adoption itself can happen anytime between November throughout December, and the adoption of the property tax levy could take place anytime in December. I want a couple of notes here before we move on. Staff has met individually with each council member for a thorough review of the budget prior to coming into this meeting, and many questions have already been asked, and the answers are published on our website. I also want to take a moment to thank the staff members who put together this proposed budget, led primarily by our Finance Director, Judy Butney, and by our Management Analyst, Megan Miles. The work has been fantastic and reflective of the direction provided by the Village Council, so thank you very much. It's a lengthy document, but we wanted to summarize the 8 key points. Starting with the general fund. The general fund, our main operating fund, has a planned use of reserves this year of $320,000. This is due entirely to the temporary holdback 10% of state income tax as a revenue source that runs for a specified period of time. Since it is measurable both in dollar amounts and specified time, that is the reason we're comfortable proposing a planned use of reserves budget. Also, maintaining our fund balances at the recommended level of 39%, which is looked favorably upon by the rating agencies. Second key point, this budget does include the food and beverage tax revenue of about $1.5 million, which was adopted in July of this year and becomes effective in January. This budget also includes an increase in the public safety pension levy. This is a requirement of state law of just over $550,000. There is, however, again, no increase in the property tax levy for operations. This is year number 7 of that streak. This no tax increase is made possible by further staffing reductions. Another 2 full-time equivalent positions proposed to be eliminated with this budget. However, nobody is losing their jobs. These positions have become vacant previously, and this is due to attrition, retirements specifically. We'll go through those 5 key points in a little bit more detail tonight. The other 3 key points we'll talk about at next week's meeting, and they include: this budget does reflect funding to implement the direction provided on village facilities. It does include a contribution to other post-employment benefits unfunded liability, which was a priority action item discussed in long-range planning. And this budget, of course, reflects and includes money for continued investment in all of our infrastructure systems. While this budget was well prepared, diligent, and thoughtful, there are a couple of things that pose risks to our budget, things where we could be incorrect. The 3 key ones we wanted to highlight. Number 1, the food and beverage tax revenue. Given that this is our first year of the food and beverage tax, we may be off in the amount of revenue that it creates. It could be more than the $1.5 million, could be less. Same thing, another risk related to a revenue source. Sales tax revenue has been fluctuating, generally declining for several of the past 12 months, but in the last 2 months has been increasing again. So we could be a little bit off in our sales tax revenue budget number. And finally, one that we've been talking about for 10 years running now is the risk that the state budget actions could affect the village's budget. Specifically, the state could take steps that could reduce our revenues or increase our costs, and that's been a big real concern as the state continues to deal with budget concerns. I want to move now to the middle whiteboard and start talking about our general fund. This is the village's main operating fund. Most of the services you think of from the village are paid for through this fund. The story here with the numbers on this whiteboard is a story of strong cost control measures, continued cost control measures. Also, continued significant increase in the cost of public safety pension, again required by state law. And on the revenue side, the story is continued flat or declining revenues bolstered by the new food and beverage tax. We'll take a closer look at expenses right here on the whiteboard. Expenses for 2018 are budgeted to increase only 1.1% compared to the FY17 budget. Personnel expenses, which account for about 3/4 of our total expenses in this fund, are budgeted to increase by only $430,000, which is 1.2%. Non-personnel expenses are budgeted to increase by less than 1% compared to last year's budget. These expense increases are due primarily, almost entirely, to the $550,000 increase in the required public safety pension contributions. We have cost savings, particularly on the personnel expense side, that are offsetting that increase. These cost savings are driven by staffing reductions, retirements in a couple areas that will not be filled, a net reduction of 2.0 in FTEs, and also retirements in the police and fire department. Long tenured employees retired and being replaced by newer employees that have a lower overall cost to the village. So those are our cost savings that are driving these cost control measures. Turning now to our general fund revenues in the middle of the middle whiteboard here. Total revenues are budgeted to be about the same as the FY17 budget and about $1.4 million more than the FY17 estimates. So flat to the budget for 17, $1.4 million more than the revenues we think we're going to collect this year. Most major revenue sources continue to be flat or declining. Sales tax, our number one revenue source, is budgeted to be flat compared to the FY17 estimate and $900,000 less than the current year's budget. Income tax is budgeted to be about $100,000 less than this year's estimate, $600,000 less than this year's budget. This is primarily due to the state's 1-year 10% holdback of state income tax. You can see why the food and beverage tax is necessary to replace lost revenues. The food and beverage tax is budgeted to generate $1.5 million in FY18, replacing lost and declining sales tax and income tax revenue. One of the revenues that is up is related to, again, the required contributions to public safety pensions. It's the property tax levy designed to make sure we cover those contributions. So it shows up not only on the cost side, but that $550,000 also shows up on the revenue side in the form of a property tax levy. And that is a nice segue into a very brief summary of our overall property tax. The total village property tax levy is proposed to increase by 4.3%. Numbers right here in blue. This is driven entirely by the increase in the required public safety pension levy. All other components of our levy are budgeted to remain exactly the same. The impact of this tax levy on a typical residential unit with a market value of about $300,000 and a taxable value of about $100,000 to be somewhere in the range of $24 to $25 in 2018. And you think to yourself, well, these numbers here on the board don't reflect a tax bill for a property like that. Certainly most properties pay much more than $580-some. That's true. Your overall tax bill is much larger than this. This is because the village portion of the tax bill is about 9% of the total tax bill. We have a wonderfully drawn graphic here that I did myself. that shows the breakdown. School districts about 68%, the village under 10%, and all others around 22%.
It's a great likeness of Washington.
Yes, I decided not to actually draw President Washington in there. That was an incredibly brief overview of the general fund and property tax levy. However, we believe the story is the same story we've been saying for months, going back to long-range planning, and all the council members have been briefed individually on this. And so with that, Mayor, we have our entire budget team here. Happy to answer any questions that you may have, and we'll take a break for those questions and comments right now.
Thank you, appreciate it. I'm going to pick up on a suggestion that Commissioner Wallace made, which is we're going to start with public comment. Any questions or comments? I caught you off guard, didn't I? Questions or comments from members of the public on what's been presented?
All three of those?
Only if you do it in three-part harmony. It's okay, we'll come back to you.
Is there clear direction?
Yes? No?
No.
No? Okay, just checking. All right, thank you. Questions or comments? Obviously, this is one of many meetings, but anything that anyone wants to weigh in on at this juncture? Commissioner Barnett?
No.
Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. First off, Dave, I think you missed your true calling.
I thought if he added fangs, it could kind of be kind of choppy off.
Anyway,
Start
you're absolutely right on the risks to the budget, but I mean, I don't think we can necessarily count on the state's ineptitude, basicly, in only being a one-year thing. I think we've got pretty good evidence demonstrating that it's not. The 10% holdback, I just don't think we can assume that it's a one-time thing. It may not be exactly a 10% holdback. Maybe it'll be 15 or 5 next time. Maybe we'll find some other vehicle to reach their hand into the pocket of local government. But I don't think we can count on this being a one-time thing. We know that our costs increasing is not a one-time thing. And I'm still struggling with the idea of a deficit budget. Dipping into reserves is warranted in certain situations. I'm not sure that the state's ineptitude is one of those situations. Nobody in this room or at this table wants to talk about raising taxes. But I think absent another idea that doesn't involve a reduction in service levels, it's a conversation we ought to have. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Waldeck, you look pensive.
Yeah. No, introductory comments, I want to, I mean, you know, we're going to be talking about this, there's a lot more detail, but I want to thank staff for coming in with the budget they have. We know why we have to increase our taxes. I think not having an increase for 5 years for operations, I think that's a great job, but I also wonder if it's the right thing to do. Everybody gets higher bills. There's higher electric, higher cable, higher phone. Gas is kind of iffy, but you know, everything's going up, and for 5 years to kind of keep things flat, except for the pensions, it's a tough job, and I'm not quite sure that it's entirely the right thing to do. Although it was a good job. Looking at the graphic, I'm beginning to wonder if we go back a few years, wasn't it more like 10% rather than 9%? And because the other entities are increasing, we're actually going down.
Yeah, it's been as high as
9 to 10.
the 10s. It's been as low as the 8s, depending on a variety of factors, I guess.
So, I thought it was good news. We're getting to be less and less of the total tax bill. I do have a couple of suggestions I'd like to talk about, and I want my fellow council members to think about it. Facilities has been a problem for years. We didn't do anything particularly this year But we should have been putting money away for facilities for a long time. And I would like to have everyone consider the possibility of adding revenue, probably on property taxes, since if we had come to a conclusion earlier in the year, people would be paying more. And so maybe we had to start socking more money away for facilities, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, or 10 years, whenever we get this resolved. We should be putting money away, so I would consider some sort of an increase to be put into that facilities fund, even though we'll have the gas tax and the forfeiture fund and the other things. I'd still like to sock a little more money away for facilities, because sooner or later, whenever we pull the trigger on that, people are going to get hit, so we might as well start now and make the hit, spread it out over a longer period of time. Secondly, not a super big deal, but I mentioned it before, we spent some time on dog facilities this year, and it occurred to me that when they call them guests, they're doggy hotels. We have a hotel tax. I think it's time that we consider having a doggy hotel tax. Roughly speaking, depending on how you count the number of rooms available, I think it was something like 130 or more, and staff looked into it a little further. But rough estimate at about $2 a night per dog, that would draw approximately $100,000, which is nothing to sneeze at. We have some human services things that we do. We don't have to designate that money for any type of human services, but it would cover costs of our Meals on Wheels. It would cover maybe some of the taxi subsidy. I mean, it doesn't have to go to something like that, but certainly $100,000 is nothing to sneeze at, and it would make dogs a better friend to people. So just food for thought as an added revenue source. And I throw that out there, and thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Others? No? Just a few things. One, I agree with Commissioner Jose. Only the magic 8 ball can tell us what's going to happen from the state and what other revenue graphs there might be. But the food and beverage tax is a replacement tax. It is designed to replace lost revenue from declining sales tax due to macroeconomic factors and trends. And I'd like it to stay that way. What I don't know how to do is how to calibrate it so that we're only replacing what we need to replace, and it doesn't sort of take on a life of its own. Understanding that there may be other things to replace. I get that. So I don't have anything more than a concept to share with you at this point, but good thing this is meeting number 1. I'll give that some more thought. Number 2, I know that at least I've mentioned before, and without too much violent objection, that let me ask a question: where in our what line of our budget would we put impact fees?
Right now, it would show up in this
In the other.
category of the other, but it would be permits, licenses, and fees, I think, is a line item in the
Right.
pages in your budget.
And we've talked about how there are impact fees that go to other taxing bodies, like the park district and the school district, and I've at least floated the notion in the past that we have either a portion of that impact fee, or a portion would be fine, or a new category that would be creating a fund to deal with historic preservation. And one of the challenges that we've always had about historic preservation as a village is we have no money laying around to do anything with to facilitate some of the goals. And certainly don't want to tax anybody for it, but to the extent that there is an impact fee that can be developed that would be, Enzo could give me the exact language, that is sufficiently related to an impact on an actual historic situation, that we could derive an impact fee like one that is driven by impact upon the schools, impact upon the parks, why not impact upon our motto of preserving the balance between tradition and progress? To the extent that we can properly designate that as such, that's something I would like to explore. And it's not really a revenue generator, because it could just carve out of the existing impact fees and a new category. But that would be a fund or an account that would be new, that would then, I think, allow the village to facilitate, I think, more through actual means in terms of historic preservation, which we currently do not have. And then third, the only interesting and intriguing thoughts, Commissioner Waldeck, I always appreciate creativity. The one thing that I'm going to say, though, and I'm going to channel former Commissioner Schnell when I do this, is there's this old report called the Cummings-McNulty Report, which was the basis for the original hotel-motel tax that we have had for many years. And if I remember correctly, and I'm paraphrasing, the basis and the justification for implementing that tax in the first place was it was designed to generate revenue that would contribute towards basically tourism. The idea being that the hotels and motels would, the visitors to the hotels and motels would pay a, was it 8%? What, I forget what it is.
That's right.
Would pay some, there would be a tax that would generate some funds, and those funds then would be used, ideally, to facilitate things that would attract more people to come and visit and stay in hotels and motels. I think there's a consistency there with visiting restaurants as well. But my only concern, and I don't mean to be funny when I say this, but if we had a doggy tax, would we then have to create things that would drive more canines to our community?
Well, their parents have left to go spend their money somewhere else, so them leaving them behind.
So I don't know. I don't know if there's a correlation there. That's what I was working for, a correlation. But anyway,
No, I wasn't thinking of the.
always appreciate creativity.
But we do spend it. I mean, we did spend a lot of time talking about doggy hotels this year.
Yes, we did. Commissioner Jose.
Thanks, Mayor, and I don't necessarily want to cut anybody else off. That's my suggestion.
I don't see anybody clamoring for the microphone.
Yeah, once you suggested that we ought to talk about raising taxes, people tend to clam up. And I agree with your characterization on the food and beverage tax as a replacement. I know that's the idea behind it. I get that 100%, and I agree that we don't want to make it any higher than it needs to be in any given instance. One of the things that we've held fast to over the last 6 years, and we'd like to continue it as long as we can, but obviously all good things come to an end at some point, is the idea of keeping the property tax levy for operations flat. Another way to potentially look at it is, well, let's keep the tax rate flat. As it turns out, due to the growth in equalized assessed value, I think it's about 4.8% if memory serves, the tax rate on the typical resident of Beverage Grove will actually drop. Or at least it's not rising as fast. Dave, correct me on this.
It drops because the estimated EAV growth, the taxable value, is 4.8%. The property tax rate increase, or the property tax levy increase is 4.3. So it would be, in theory, a slight reduction. There's other factors involved at other levels of government, but basically it would be a slight reduction in the rate.
But at least vis-a-vis the village, it's going down about 0.5%. Yeah, I don't like the idea of raising the property tax for the simple fact that your home is the most illiquid asset you have. It's not an ATM, and government shouldn't treat it that way. But we do have bills to pay, and if we could get to a flat rate, that would close a portion of the gap. It's $320,000 right now. Back of the napkin, it's what, about $150,000 or so. So it gets you about halfway there.
It would just be, I think, if you're talking about applying that there, we can do some numbers for you. We'll get that for you. So the question is, if we tried to target a flat rate, how much would the resulting levy be?
Correct.
I think we can track that number down.
Just a thought.
Anyone else? Anyone else feeling
Oh.
pensive?
Another quick thought, when I talked about increases or setting money aside for facilities, was reading that District 99 letter. They're going to plan on collecting money, about $65 per a $300,000 home for their facilities. So with the amount of money that they're already collecting and adding another $65, I think us taking money, putting it aside for facilities is still a good idea. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Well, everyone's noodling. Any further public comment? Yes, please. Todd.
Kind of along Craig's lines, with the 320, when you kind of peel back into these fund summaries, that you were talking about the overall, but I mean, you look at the risk management, it was projected to be $200,000 negative this fiscal year budget. Next year, it's 409, which, understanding that you don't know what those claims are gonna be, but really our budget is more than that, because it's, you know, you're talking 400, it's funded by your general fund, so in theory, you're 700 in a hole. Similarly, on the fleet services, well, that one, I don't know that you really need a whole lot of cash in there, but those cash reserves that you had in there in the future were good, and we've been spending those down, you know, year over year. And again, I don't know that you really need a whole lot of cash in fleet services, but. Right. And then the last one was, did you not buy a vehicle this year on the equipment?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, if I could, Mayor, I just, such a great lead-in by Mr. Paradis there. The traditional next step in our presentation is a quick summary of 4 funds that are related to the general fund. They are shown here behind me. They're the ones that Mr. Paradis just kind of walked us through. They are the health fund, the risk fund, fleets and equipment replacement funds. These funds are related to the general fund very closely in a sense that these are designed to pay for certain specific things, as the names would imply. Fleet is our vehicle fleet. And they are hardly ever balanced in any one particular year, but over 5 to 10 year periods, they tend to balance out over that horizon. There's a little bit of variability. You can see the numbers here. We've been doing a good job of controlling costs in all of these funds, and so we try to get the fund balance basically as close to zero as we can, the cash balance in these funds. So Mr. Paradis really kind of took my whole presentation about how that works, so thank you. But we're happy to answer any questions there. One of the things when you start managing 5 funds together is the first concept is every single dollar counts. We are stewards of the public's money. It's very important to us to be fiscally prudent. You're talking about $50, $60, $70 million, the $320,000 planned use of reserve can fluctuate greatly, and it's probably within the margin of error. So is this a balanced budget? Can we bring it in balanced? We'll see how it goes throughout the year depending on performance in 4 other funds, and particularly the revenue in food and beverage and sales tax. If the council would like any further presentation or has any questions about the 4 other funds, then that's traditionally been Judy's presentation, so she's here to answer any questions related to those funds as well.
Thanks. Further public questions or comments on those funds? Any questions or comments from the council?
The budget to me is pretty dissatisfying. We're talking about doing essentially the same things as we've done before, incurring the same risks as we've always incurred, and having a little bit of a deficit. And deficit, I understand Dave's point, it could arguably be a rounding error or an operational effect change that washes at the end of the year, certainly. We've seen that over years. But nothing about sales tax revenue, state budget actions is new, and nothing about that is going to change. To Greg's point, there's no reason to expect that all of a sudden Springfield's going to sort it out and the economy's going to take off and we're going to be flush. And so I have a hard time accepting the idea that we're going to essentially do the same things. We're not going to do facilities. There's a host of things we're not going to do that have been on everybody's list. and we're going to just have a few less personnel and therefore have a slight deficit budget. That sounds to me like a lot of action for no gain. And I think we should be balanced to start with, at least intentionally out of the gate. We missed opportunities on food and beverage tax rates to do that. There's other opportunities to do that just within the existing budget. But then I think that whether it's Bill's point on facilities or Greg's point about the long-term state risks, just holding serve is not, guys. We've had this conversation time and again, and we just keep being thrilled that we held our property taxes, because that's awesome. But at some point, we're going to run out of staff to reduce. At some point, we're going to run out of senior employees who are going to retire. And at some point, we're going to have to build a building. And, maybe it won't be us, maybe. But I don't think we're doing, I don't think we're acting as stewards. I don't think we're acting as trustees to just hold serve on property taxes and have that be our primary and apparently driving focus.
Thank you, Bob. I think these are all issues that, regardless of what this council does, should be made a high awareness and priority for the community, because they have opportunity to directly express, well, they have their opportunity to directly express their views all the time, but I think on a more widespread basis in about a year. And I think it's incumbent upon us to make clear that the whole community has opportunity to weigh in on what they think and where they want stuff to go. And they probably have one of the most significant opportunities to do so in about a year than in recent history. And I think I can take away a lot of this trepidation and concern. The community can speak directly to the point. And I think it's our job to educate them, and we'll find out. They'll tell us exactly what they think. They've done it before, they'll do it again. Other questions, comments? All right, well, more to come.
And we can continue with that education and engagement for next Tuesday and several Tuesdays throughout the month of October and November. So thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you to everyone for your thoughts and comments, and obviously we'll continue the conversation as we go along, and we'll continue to encourage more input and comments from the public. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you and good night.